I'm really going to emphasize to you, I am an economist, I'm an econometrician, if you want to talk about Ukraine and natural gas prices, that's great. I am not an expert in education in the world of the GSE, and I'm not going to pretend to be. So I might say some things that are going to be kind of naive. Maybe sometimes that's useful. Sometimes it's just naive. Okay, so let me say a few things about the Harvard Climate Initiative. So a little over a year ago, President Bacow appointed me, announced that we had divested from fossil fuels, and most importantly said that we really want to be moving forward in a constructive way here at Harvard. And I think that's incredibly wise decision, and it's something that we need to do. So climate change, as an economist, I like to think, and especially one that worked in the Obama administration, where we worked really significantly to make forward progress on policy in climate. I like to think of the possibility of having government actually be really effective and efficient, and we introduce efficient policies, and then we have a smooth transition to a decarbonized future that is going to be equitable across all the impacted communities, and we'll also do that in time to avoid the worst damages. Things are a little bit harder than that, and I think that we're not in a position to really count on government carrying a lot of water. It's wonderful that the Inflation Reduction Act was passed and supported, and that we're going to have a big build out of wind and solar and so forth as a result of that, but we have far, far, far too much to do to really rely on government. We have to have all of our leading institutions pulled together, and universities play a special role. Universities are perhaps the leading, most important and most enduring institution in the Western world, and it is something that we collectively have a big responsibility as universities to work on. And Harvard, as a leading university, or perhaps the leading university, has a special responsibility to work on. The problems of climate change are ones that go across all of our different disciplines. It doesn't fit just within the business school. It doesn't fit just within the sciences and arts and sciences. It doesn't fit just within GSE. It goes across everything that we do. And if we're really going to make progress, we're going to have to make progress together. It's great for us to work with our graduate students, for us to work in our labs, for us to have our own projects. That is really important, but it's not enough. We have to be able to come together if we really expect to have impact on large and wide-scale problems. That's what we're doing in terms of my vice provostial job. That's what we're doing with the Salata Institute. The Salata Institute does sit at the center. It is a university-level enterprise, and it will be the central hub for these sorts of activities. We're not going to be too top-down. We're not going to tell people what to do, but we would love it if people communicate with each other, and we would be very happy to support cross-disciplinary work. We are in the process of supporting some cross-school research programs, which we are choosing among other things, to be impactful so that they really affect real-world problems in climate, and they're going to have short-run visible impacts. We will also be doing longer-term work and supporting longer-term research. We'll be supporting curricular activities here on campus. What can we do here? And actually, we had a report by a climate education committee, which had representatives from all of the different schools, including GSE, on it. And that's right. And so lots of different folks from across the university participated in that. And we have actually, it turns out that that's already been impactful at other universities. We have received intel from other major universities that they have found that to be a very useful report and helped them guide their work, especially in the decentralized universities, the more decentralized of the universities. So we're pushing forward on that front. We're pushing forward on student engagement. We're pushing forward on alumni engagement. We're pushing forward on external impact. So we're trying to work on all of these different fronts. We've got to. So here's a challenge. So I was about to use the phrase "firing on all cylinders," and that's probably not the best phrase. So we've got to think of the EV version of that. I guess Rivian isn't Rivian the one with all the wheel that got four engines, one in each, four motors, I should say, one in each wheel. So firing on all wheels.
It's the fire is the problem.
It's the yeah. We'll work on this. We'll work on this.
Sales are full.
Our sales are full. That's not the right one either. We'll work on this. We're going to work on this, okay? So, all right, so that's right. So let me can I make a few just quick naive remarks on education? So there's a question of, where we are right now is an incredible moment of change because we've got really cheap technologies, and so we can imagine a world where we have the power sector decarbonized and we're spinning all of our wheels. That's not the right one either, but wheels are fine. Okay. But we're all EVs. We're doing EVs and so forth, but we still got half. That's like half. Okay, that's half of emissions. We still have half of emissions to go. So there's a huge amount of work to do. But it's an opportunity to really say, wow, we've got a lot going on. At the same time, it is incredibly apparent to us how severe the actual reality of climate change is, and earlier than a lot of scientists had expected. So, what is it that can prompt additional action? I don't know. Anybody's theory of change, a piece of that theory of change has to be education of our youth, education of our youngest citizens, and helping them understand. And helping them understand in a very constructive way how the world is changing and how they can be part of having that change be something that's going to be okay for them, but at the same time adapting to them and doing what we need to do to minimize the worst damage. How you strike that balance so it doesn't just terrorize or doesn't get taken out of the curriculum, I don't know. That's not my skill set, but that seems to be an incredibly important challenge for everybody. I was just looking at the Yale Project on Climate Communication surveys, and I thought I'm just going to give you a few statistics that are really interesting and suggest how much work there is to do. So what fraction of the population thinks that global warming is happening? It turns out 72%, and actually it's a majority across almost every county in the United States. It's quite remarkable. What fraction think that it's anthropogenic? Well, that's 57%, so that's not 72%. So a lot of people think it's happening, but actually it's not anthropogenic. And if you look at that by county, that is, there's a lot of counties that are down in the 25% that think it's anthropogenic. So that's unlike the first one, which everybody seems to agree, there's actually big regional skew in the second one, the anthropogenic. How many hear about global warming is the word they use? So the word is how many times a week? Do you hear about global warming in the media at least one time a week? This is a remarkable statistic. So I think, how many times do I hear about global warming in the media? Well, maybe I listen to that stuff 30 times a day, including the podcasts. I don't know. What fraction of the population hears about it once a week in the media? 33%. Isn't that amazing? So, we're it seems like, I think we're in a little bit of a bubble right here. And the question is, how can this be communicated to the rest of the world and become part of the general conversation? And I think elementary and middle school and high school education has a huge, huge role in that, in doing this properly, surfacing these issues, having constructive conversations, moving forward in a calm, constructive, but aware fashion. How that happens, I don't know. It's a huge agenda, but I think any theory of change has to take that into account. So with that, let me turn this over.
Great. Well, it's a treat to be here. Good. We have a long purple line. That was the hope. So I'm Spencer Glendon, and it really is a treat to be here. I started working on climate change 10 years ago. Actually, at the time, I directed research at one of the largest financial institutions in the world. And I was interested in questions that nobody worked on. That was my main purview, was actually working on topics that nobody liked to work on. And so I started working on climate change because nobody worked on it. In fact, not just that, a little bit like Jim said, also nobody talked about it. And if anybody brought it up, people acted pretty weird. So people in the business world would start using language they would never use in the business world. Like, I don't believe in that. If you said, I don't believe in Ford Motor Company, or I don't believe in bonds, or I don't believe in money, you'd be disqualified. But somehow it was okay to say another thing, which was, I'm not sure. Now, finance is very interesting because it's the business of uncertainty. And so if you're in finance and you say, I don't want to talk about that because I'm not sure, you should be disqualified. Because you live in the world of uncertainty, you're never sure. And so what I discovered was there were these strange forms of language. And so I started working on climate change because no one else worked on it. And that's been exciting and lonely. And a lot of you understand what that loneliness is like. But the great thing is we now have a room full of people that is less lonely, and that's going to become even more so because everyone will work on climate change. So actually, Jim's a good example. He didn't expect to work on climate change. It then became his job. Actually, I now work almost all the time with climate scientists, almost all of whom started as non-climate scientists. So last night I sat down next to someone whose main interest was barnacles. Barnacles was what she loved. And now she's a climate scientist because the barnacles, to use a modern parlance, got really jacked up. And she wanted to understand why. And so I'm going to explain to you, I started an initiative called Probable Futures to make a bridge between climate science and culture. Because climate science turned out to be much better than economics. I have a PhD in economics from this institution, and climate science turned out to have better models that worked better, that were more predictive than models in economics, but nobody was using them. And so I wanted to make them useful. But what I really discovered, there was a question earlier on the panel, what motivated you, was this graph. So I started by reading old journals from the 70s, and I discovered this. And why this is relevant is this is the history of temperature on our planet, going back to 10,000 BCE. And what you can see is it goes sideways. It's almost no volatility. And I start in 10,000 BCE because that's when humans first settled. Humans, for the first 190,000 years, didn't build permanent structures. And then they did this weird thing. They started building permanent structures, and then they built little towns, and then they built schools. So there were no schools for the first 190,000 years that humans existed, and then there started being schools. And the thing is, once we started building schools, the climate didn't change. That green band is the green band of what we would call civilization. And I became obsessed with, why doesn't anybody know this? I actually talked to a great scientist at Stanford, and I said, just to be sure, civilization has only existed under stability, and he said, everybody knows that. And I said, nobody knows that. And so it's not just that it was so nice that it was actually everywhere on Earth was not too hot for us. There was no place on Earth too hot for a human body. And so people started making plans. They started assuming it. They started using language like 1 in 100. If I know the past, I know the future. People stopped paying attention to the physical world. Now, this was not true of native communities. This was not true of other societies. But the society that dominated the world physically did not think the physical world was interesting. If you want evidence of that, for a long time there was no AP Earth Science, because, hey, it just sits there. It doesn't change. And so what we did was we divided the world up into little slices, and everything became someone else's job. And so I turned out to be interested in this thing that was nobody's job. Really not at the university. Nobody at Harvard at the time studied climate change. They studied maybe the atmosphere or a river, but they didn't study climate change. And what I discovered is basically a stable climate is the foundation for all of society. We built everything else on top of it, and we treat it like it's solid, but it is not solid. All those things are tippy. And so we talked about civilization. You could argue this is sort of the peak of civilization. This is Paris. That's the Champs-Élysées running right down the center. That's why the reason they built the Champs-Élysées was for the storm sewer. The storm sewer of Paris does not have much capacity because Paris rains often. It's where they invented the umbrella. It never rains hard, until now. And so now Paris has flooding. Actually, might interest you that London, which is thought of as rainy, the storm sewer is built for a 1/4 inch of rain a day maximum. It never rains hard, and now they have floods. And every building there was built for a range of temperature that is now being violated. That is a data graphic of climate risk. Because the risk has shifted, the distribution has shifted, and everything in that room on that picture is in the wrong place. And so we need to prepare. What does that preparation entail? Not just thinking about warmer temperatures, but the loss of stability. That stability that we took for granted. So we need a new skill, and that is climate awareness. We need to be aware of the world around us. We need to bring the physical world into our lives. The good thing is children already do that. We just teach them to move it out of their purview. We need to change the way we think about this, because this is what's happening. And if the climate breaks altogether, it was said eloquently before, you can have the best school system you want. If the Earth is on fire, or if billions of people are moving, it won't matter. Because this is the longer time horizon. And the reason we know this is because we had those narrow specialists who figured out the history of temperature on Earth. Why, for the first 190,000 years, didn't they settle? Because they didn't live in the green band. They lived in the volatile blue area. They had to chase the nice weather all the time. The weather was not stable, so they had to move. So we built probable futures to build this bridge, and I'm going to show you some maps. I'm going to pick 28 degrees C, 82 Fahrenheit wet bulb days in Dallas. That may sound like a mouthful, but I showed it to the guy from Dallas. He's like, I know exactly what that is. What that is a day when it's 82 degrees and 100% humidity, or it's 86 and 85% humidity, or it's 100 degrees and 45% humidity. It's unsafe for children to go out at recess. That's what that is. So we built a tool where you can go anywhere in the world and click on a cell and see the past. So you may notice there's a little thing along the top there. It says 0.5 degrees, 1 degrees, 1.5, 2.5, 2, 2.5, 3. At 0.5 degrees, which is this map, which is 1970 to 2000, the late 20th century, when we set all of the standards for all of the buildings in America, there was in Dallas 1 such day a year on an average year, 4 in a warm year. So climate is a distribution. When we went from 0.5 to 1, it became more common. 1.5, it's yet more common. But look what's happening in Louisiana, further down in Texas. And now you see these ranges are really wide now. There might be no such days, and there might be a month of such days. We need to prepare for this because 2 degrees is coming. We are not stopping at 1.5. 1.5, the odds in the science community are now taken. It's 50-50 in the next 4 years that we pass 1.5. And so this is 2.5. This is 3. This is not safe for children in much of the South. But we need to understand, so the purpose of this was to make vivid what could be in a way that's motivating and clarifying. I'm going to show you one more set of graphs, because you can zoom out and look at the world of extreme drought. So this is the late 20th century. Extreme drought is defined locally. So whatever it is, it's not that the Amazon drought and the Sahara drought are the same, but this is extreme drought, and in the late 20th century it was extreme, so it was rare. This is a probability map. Just going from 0.5 to 1 degree C, all of these places start having a more than 10% chance annually of extreme drought. And that map is already the map of where we've had droughts and on fire. These data are astoundingly good. But look what happens when we go from 1 to 1.5. Yellow means more than a third of the time. What was rare is much of the time, and orange is most of the time. And the northern coast of Africa becomes basically part of the Sahara. And so these are the futures we need to understand in a way that's much more vivid. And so you're going to need imagination to live in that world. It's not just a plan, it's imagining. Because the future is usually portrayed in one of 2 ways. Somehow there are lots of EVs and it's the same, or it's Mad Max. That's it. That's the 2 choices we're given. Number 1 is no longer possible because we cannot go back. Number 2 is avoidable. So we have to live in the probable futures in between. That's why we named this probable futures. We can't pick one future. There's a range, and we can choose between them, and we have to treat them with some uncertainty. So let's populate those with stories. And I'm going to be generous about what I mean by stories. How to live well under realistic constraints that are not miracles. And we've actually done some work with storytellers in Hollywood. This came from a writer from The Handmaid's Tale. We learned this yesterday. If your story doesn't include climate change, it is science fiction. And so the genres of storytelling, what are they? They're like budgets. That's a story. Essays, songs, books. And so the climate will be harsher, but we can live better. So encourage kids to stay attuned to the natural world. Let's reawaken that interest in adults. I'm partly promoting something. It is totally free. It's a free global utility, so I'm not selling it. We call it marketing, but it's not even a market. Let's reawaken that interest in adults, and it's written to do that. So there's lots of informational material. This is where we usually end. At the bottom, make friends, learn to cook, dance and sing. Those are climate strategies because you can do those in any climate, and you need community. So I'm now happy to join the fellow panelists, but and I don't know if I stayed within 7 minutes, but anyway, thank you.
Thank you. As we're getting up here, I just can't, I know that you've got some questions, but I just can't. Thank you for sharing your climate story.
Oh, yeah.
I think we all have stories about how we got interested in climate originally, and I thought what was interesting about your story was that it started by looking at some data, and that's actually how I got interested in climate too, working back in the 1990s. I started out sort of, with a sort of a healthy academic skepticism, basically. The science modelers would say, trust me, I have a big model, I'm from MIT and I'm smart, so this is the way it is. And being an econometrician, I never was totally convinced, so I started doing a bunch of econometric analysis or statistical analysis of the climate data and concluded that they were right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, the first climate, so I don't read newspapers. My practice is to read books, good magazines, and journal articles. So when I started reading papers from the 70s. And I was just astonished at how good they were. But also what was interesting was the skeptics were mostly scientists who said, it can't be that simple. It can't just be our behavior and our burning of stuff. And so what happened was one after the other, scientists replicated the results. And like, God, it really is that easy. It is that simple. And it's one of the things I find compelling about it is that it's intuitive also. It's like, it's just us burning up the planet. How could it just be that?
Yeah.
And so it turns out that it started with the notion that it was complex and turned out to be intuitive, resonant, like kids get it, and then adults unlearn it because like it can't be, that's got to be something else.
Yeah. And it's easy to throw in disinformation and make it complicated, but in fact, the statistical footprint is incredibly strong, uncontroversial.
Yeah.
I'm happy to just kind of sit over here and listen, and you guys can keep going if you like, or I could, throw in a few questions.
You're the boss.
Yeah.
Guys, did you notice what he just said? Let's make note of that.
That's kind of a Harvard in-joke, I think.
Definitely. So thank you both. I want to keep this conversation going, and certainly I am enjoying listening to both of you because, as we said, this is an invitation to learn this year as a community. But I'm curious, so we've known for a while that this is going on. Why hasn't there been movement? Why hasn't there been traction? What have we been doing wrong so that it's just getting worse? So what should we not be doing? What should we not be repeating?
I'm happy to go first, or you can?
Oh, yeah, go ahead. I mean, sure. We'll have, it'll be interesting to hear what you say.
All right. I will, I think there are two big reasons why we didn't make progress on this. And one of them has to do with essentially the moral and the moral philosophy, if you will, of Western civilization, which is we will solve all problems with more. All problems will be solved with more. And actually, economics is a very interesting representation of that. It started out as a discipline for figuring out how to deal with constraints, and then it got really obsessed with the infinite. Bob Solow once said, once you start thinking about growth, it's hard to think about anything else. And so we started thinking without limits. And the thinking without limits, once you start thinking that way, it's very hard to then reimpose limits. And so I think that there is an inherent unlimited nature to our culture that's saying, no, we can't have everything, is endemic. So one of my favorite examples of this actually is the endangered species idea, which is we need to figure out the minimum number of these things to keep and then just stay above that. And so there's this very interesting debate about tuna. There's one group of people who says we should still be fishing tuna, and the other group of people says we should stop fishing tuna. And the people who say they should stop say we've killed 97% of the tuna, there are only 3% left, and the other people say there are twice as many tuna as you think. So they think we've killed 94% of the tuna. And so the idea that the people who think 97 is like 94% is like there's way more tuna. We've only killed 94% of them is representative of this mindset that just tell us where the absolute limits are. And then within this, I think we developed disciplines that are just so narrow, and they expanded human knowledge, what we know, but none of us really knew it. And so discovering, for me, I started hanging out with scientists. I just started calling them, saying, can I talk to you? I've read your paper from 1985. And they're like, you're one of 9 people who read my paper from 1985. And I would go see them and talk to them. And I discovered that their knowledge it wasn't their job to spread it. And nobody built bridges around that circle that I showed you. Nobody built the bridges between one thing and another. And I have 2 indictments of the university as an institution. The first is this narrow specialization, and the other is the obsession with the new. So what I discovered was there was lots of cool stuff that academics had already, that was the sort of, everybody knows that, and nobody knew it. And so it was no longer novel. So when I proposed probable futures, I said, could we make a tool that people would find useful, they could use, would take the best of science, make it handy? Like, sure, wouldn't be hard. And I said, well, that's great. And they're like, no, it's not hard. Like, that's not interesting. I don't want to work on something that uses already known things and is really just execution and following through. I want to do novel things. And what I discovered was the world was littered with university projects that had been done as one-offs, and then were like broken satellites orbiting the Earth as space garbage that are not updated. And so this brings me to my very last point, which we stopped valuing maintenance. We value innovation so much that we stopped valuing taking care of things. So the maintenance department in America is the department that fixes things that already broke. And the idea that we just take care faded from culture. And so we just didn't have the instincts or the moral framework or the bridges. And so it just sat around as someone else's job. Someone else, for what it's worth, I like looking at the history of language. Until the early 20th century, the term someone else didn't appear in the English language. It's a term of scale. It's not you, it's not Jim, it's not Bridget, it's not anybody, it's someone else. It's a novel term for scale. And so I think those are the ingredients that I found when I went asking that question.
Okay.
I'm going to share one story, very, very short story that I think builds on your sort of growth economists' challenges of challenges. And you mentioned endangered species. I was at a day-long thing run by the Congressional Budget Office, but bringing in academics to talk about what are the budgetary impacts of climate change. And there was this one, we were just going through this, it's good exercise, health insurance and floods and the sort of things. And then there's this line item on the Endangered Species Act, and we started talking about that. And the estimates were that it was going to go up a little bit, and then it was going to go down. I said, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why aren't we going to be spending a lot of money on endangered species? Well, it's because they go extinct, and then you don't have to spend the money.
Yeah.
So let me answer Bridget's question.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give a different take. Yours is about societal moving in the wrong direction, and you probably won't like this. Maybe this is controversial. I'm going to label what you just said as degrowth. Would that be fair?
No.
Okay. Let me.
You can label. I mean, I'm happy to be. Choose your label, okay. And we'll see if it fits.
Let me give you a different answer, which is, I think that there was a general awareness. If you go back to the work of Bill Nordhaus back in the late 1980s and 1990s, who really brought this forward as an economist, and then many other people, the problem at the time was that there was a recognition that climate change was anthropogenic among the scientists and among the economists. That wasn't such a controversial thing. There was a recognition that it comes in the primary instance from burning CO2, and so the question was, how do you burn less CO2? How do you make that transition? And so the fundamental framing of the problem at the time was that there wasn't really any reasonable alternative but burning fossil fuels if you want to have energy to support modern society. We didn't have cheap wind and solar. We had incredibly expensive wind and solar. There were attempts to have nuclear power, but that was not well adopted by society. costly, and actually it's like really expensive, and that was sort of, there was a period in which that was really thought to be the power of the future, but it didn't work out. So we just didn't really have, and there's only so many rivers you want to dam up, so we didn't really have potential for more hydro. So sort of what you were stuck with, and for cars, you didn't have any alternatives really. So, as you've probably seen the pictures of the EVs from the 1980s or 1990s, who would want to drive that, So we didn't really have an alternative. So what are you stuck with? You're stuck with, well, you better conserve, you better wear more sweaters, we better have a carbon tax. It's all of these things. It's not stuff that's going to be very palatable. And so people didn't want that. It wasn't politically acceptable. The economists couldn't sort of get off that being the solution because no one could think of other solutions. We're in a remarkably different situation today where we really can imagine. You don't have to, frankly, you shouldn't actually have to have a subsidy to buy an EV if you have enough sort of resource flow that you're not cash constrained, because EVs, and even today, an EV is cheaper over the life of the vehicle than an internal combustion engine vehicle. So, we have these alternatives today so that we can think about much broader policy solutions. That's not to say that we have good answers to steel or to concrete or to agriculture or to jet aviation fuels. We have some really important challenges ahead, but at least they're cabined. So I think that my answer is going to be much more about the evolution of technology and the fact that we then politically weren't able to do the hard things that would have been necessary to reduce consumption.
So I have a feeling if I let you guys go back and forth, you would definitely argue about how we interpret the past. But I want to pivot and say, because really that question was meant to be about how do we take the lessons from the past about what not to do as we look to the future? Because I want to press on a little bit. Yes, we have things now that we didn't have before. But just because we have solar, just because we have wind, I don't think we're going to snap our fingers and all of a sudden solve climate. It's going to take more than that. And certainly, Spencer, the thing that you mentioned, we grapple with as an institution. I think the Ed School does a remarkably good job in rewarding and incentivizing when we discover something. It doesn't just end up in a journal article. Part of what we're trying to do and why we had the panel earlier is about how do we get that into practice. But research use is incredibly complicated and difficult. Yep. So what do we carry forward from those lessons from the past, regardless of what you might disagree on that, but what is it going to take going forward?
Can I go first on this one?
Yeah.
Because I want to amplify something that both of you said, which is sort of your critique of academics and the stress on the new, and then I love the image of the broken satellites going around, because I think that is a valid critique of a lot of how academic works. That's the incentive structure.
We give tenure based on pushing the frontier.
That is exactly right. That's exactly what you get tenure for. What we are trying to do with the Salati Institute and what we're trying to do at Harvard is to say there are lots of hard problems. There are lots of problems that have a lot of intellectual interest in them, but they're also ones that are applied and practical and have real-world payoffs. So let's really try to work on those. That's going to require durable commitments to working on that problem. Let's suppose you pick aviation fuels. That is not an easy problem. That is a problem that's going to take 20 years to figure out. We don't know. We sort of have maybe an idea of what the process might be to think about it, but we really don't know the solutions. And so that's going to require a durable commitment. An institution like a university can make those durable commitments. Individual researchers are disincentivized from doing that, but it's possible for us to make the durable commitments to working on a hard problem. I just happen to use one that I'm personally interested in, but you can think about that across the board. So that is making those durable commitments, and that's exactly what you're trying to do here at GSE, thinking about how can we make a durable commitment to moving forward with helping school districts figure out how to green their and make more resilient their infrastructure, and how can we really think hard about the K-12 curriculum and education and so forth. That is a project. That is not a one-off. That is an ongoing commitment, and it is fantastic that you are doing that. That is just it's just great because there's need, and this is the place to do it.
Education, the whole education sector is an important lever for this change. And there are things that we can do that we will do and that will be important for the world?
Yeah.
Spencer?
So I have a couple of things. The first is, I think it may sound squishy, but I think we do need a different mindset. And the first part of it, I would say, is a risk-aware mindset. We now live in a very risky world, and every decision we make changes the profile of risks prospectively. We don't need to go into my critique of the Nordhaus models, but they're not risk models.
No.
And so what happens is the models don't tell you, in fact, it might interest you, the economic models that told us that it was expensive, the papers that were published say things like, we may discover we prefer living in deserts. And that's a Nordhaus quote from one of his most famous papers, and the point is, the models kept producing productivity infinitely, and no bad things happened. And part of the reason for that is that today's adults didn't experience bad things.
Yeah.
So if you take the 55-year-old CEO, during their entire career, interest rates went down. There were no nuclear wars. They didn't even experience inflation, let alone one recession. And so it became a culture of maximization and not a culture of risk. And so it's been very interesting to talk about, so you talk about climate change in the United States to, I'm 53, to 50 to 60-year-old to 65-year-old men, and they talk about technology. You talk with people in Africa, you talk with people in Mexico, you talk with people who survived the Cultural Revolution, they talk about risk. And we do not have a risk mindset in this country, and we promoted the idea of maximization. And I think it's the kids telling us, hey, like, sure, maybe it all works out, but that's not the lesson you're telling me in my life as a child. And so the lesson that, well, it would be expensive to reduce risk, it's like a kid saying, well, my behavior, I'm doing something that's damaging, but it's kind of expensive, Mom, for me to change my behavior. I do think that prioritizing a risk mentality as part of our consciousness and building it into our models. So I'll give a little example that we'll leave Bill Nordhaus out of it. I've talked with the people who run many of the models that govern some of the biggest banks in the country. And what they want from me over and over again is one number to put in their spreadsheet. Just tell me the number so that I can figure out the price. And I say, but there's this wide range of outcomes, and the range of outcomes keeps getting wider. And I can tell you where uncertainty is growing the most. And where there's uncertainty, you shouldn't offer a price. You don't know. We have no mentality of, you know what, we need to back off. So it's not that I'm degrowth. It's that I'm opposed to two things, or I think, my views, I think we've endangered ourselves by maximizing, and we've endangered ourselves by not thinking about risks, and mostly because we didn't experience them. And if you look back far enough, you find real risks, you find bad outcomes. And so the models that tell you it will cost 2 or 3% of GDP, those models constrain the participants to never move. There's no migration permitted in the model. There's no political unrest in the model because the testing period had no political unrest. And it's not that I have a better estimate for political unrest, but I think maybe they shouldn't have had decimal places, and they should have had super wide ranges, and they should have had lots of use of what I now understand that this term is called the habitual present tense. You say London is rainy. What that means is it always was rainy, it is now rainy, always will be rainy. A lot of our models take things from the past, use the habitual present tense to describe an infinite future. I think we just said, this is what it was like. And we don't know what it'll be like, but we know what our influences are. And so there's a kind of modesty to it. And so risk awareness and modesty, giving space for nature, so you're not debating over 94 versus 97% of the tuna. That kind of thing, I think, would make a big difference. And kids get it, but it is part of education.
So Spencer, you're talking a lot about our recent history. Bad things didn't happen, so it's difficult for adults to think about really bad things happening. So I want to transition a little bit to bring this closer to education. I want to apologize to everyone. I'm sorry. I ended up with a panel with 3 economists. You've heard a little bit about models. But as you can tell, we are bringing different things to this conversation. But as we said earlier, this is a civilization problem. This is a problem for all of society. We've talked today about the education sector. You both have spent a lot of time thinking about other sectors. How can we work together or bring education to have a seat at the table or to have other sectors reach into education, since it's going to take all of us?
So I'll start just because I have something simple to say, which is that actually we mostly need to educate adults right now. And so one of the things we need to, I think the world needs help from ed school people, because there are millions of people for whom sustainability is now becoming part of their life, and they have a super disorganized framework for it. So they immediately start talking about EVs or solar panels or Exxon or something. They have a lot of facts, but they don't have a framework. And so developing frameworks for adults to start working on things. I really like I'm sorry, I don't know your name in the 3 seats back.
Tina.
To design, the kinds of design thinking, the kinds of learning. We have a lot of people who know theoretically kind of a lot about climate change, but it's super messy. Giving them some context so they can bring it into their world, whether they're a superintendent or something else, is urgent. And so that's part of why Probable Futures started out as a data tool and is now mostly an educational tool, because what we need is a framework for people to bring it into their lives.
Jim?
So I'm actually going to disagree a little bit. I think, if I think about, I've had so many conversations with adults that their awareness of their climate concerns are actually driven by conversations with their children. And, it's tough if you're sitting over dinner and your daughter or your son says to you, well, Dad, what have do you do anything that is, good for the planet?
Or Greta said, Mom and Dad. That's what I hear.
Yeah. So I think it's incredibly, if you think this analogy is used a lot, but if you think about the remarkable transformation in the adoption of gay marriage. I mean, boy, that was really driven by education at the youngest levels. In my view, that's a big transformation of the youth accepting something that was difficult for the adults to accept, and then it just became part of our culture. So I have to really think that, now I know this isn't operating on the time frames, this is not on a 5-year time scale, but it's arguably on a 10 or 15-year time scale, and these challenges are going to continue. So I actually really do, my own opinion, for what it's worth, is that K-12 education is incredibly important, but it's also very hard. So I'm going to go back to my comments that I said before. I don't know what the right framing is. I think, is it helpful in a K-12 education to show that picture of how it's not safe for kids to go outside in Houston for, at a 2 or 3 degree world? Is that something that helps them understand change, or is it something that just makes them incredibly depressed or worried or wondering what, how they can
Fernando and I have
handle that?
Talked about this. I've actually talked about this with some of the previous panelists as well. So it depends if you just tell them this is it, or if you say, we're going to need to figure out how to live in a world that's different. So I'll give you an example from people working in China. Drought is a big problem in China. Assigning 7th graders a project of thinking about how are we going to deal with this is very different than just telling them that's the deal.
Yeah.
And so the idea is that we've spent a lot of time with psychologists to understand there's a big difference between anxiety and fear. Fear is something that you can name specifically and then do something about. kids have lots of anxiety and it's miserable. But if you say, here's the thing we need to prepare for, then it's tractable. And I think that the reason, so it's absolutely imperative for kids. I don't think we have any disagreement about the importance of kids learning about it. The difference, I would say, is we need adults to bring it into their actions. So gay marriage is, I think, an important, good comparison for some reasons, but it didn't become part of your life if you weren't gay. And so it needs to be part of your job if you work in any administration. And that transition is both cultural and practical. And so I think that and the other thing is just teaching teachers. I mean, that's part of why I'm here, is like the adults we need to teach are the ones who help the kids learn in a productive way. So that map can be terrible or great, depending on the context within which it's delivered. And so the other thing is just, I really can't emphasize enough that the physical world is amazing. And starting with, we have a great planet, and it used to be perfect. And it's going to be less perfect, but we need to figure out how to live in it, is not a hopeless statement. There's some sadness in it and some ownership of that sadness. But it's a project. It's a lot like aging. Like, my body is worse than 3 weeks ago. But I can figure out how to live within that constraint without despondency. And so saying, you know, life is going to be a little harder, but we could live better in it. And this is why I think that, I really think that we have limits. That's okay. Life can be awesome within those limits. Now, it may prove that we can also grow within those limits. But behaving as if the limits don't exist is part of what the children are rebelling against. And so we give them limits in other contexts, and then we free ourselves from them in other ways. I think just living in ranges and limits with a kind of, that's a framework that is actually deeply human and can be internalized. And so the idea of the maps, they're filled of stories. You click on a cell and see what happened in Dallas. The story about Dallas actually is that Dallas put the baseball stadium indoors because people stopped going.
Yeah.
But they made it a clear roof so it felt like a sunny day. But it's always 72 degrees at the Texas Rangers games, every single time. And you can say, well, that's great. We can play baseball all the time. But you know what? Every sport in Texas is now played inside. And that's just sad. And so making kids, one of the things, I'll give you a good example. I think summer vacation will go away in a lot of places, and it will become fall vacation so that kids can go outside. Now, that's heartbreaking and super practical. Like, let's not have times when kids can't go outside be the times we let them go outside. And so autumn can be great. Maybe it's winter, but that's the kind of practical decision as stewards we need to make. And that's not a framework that's currently available. We've been teaching meteorologists. TV meteorologists have no idea. They weren't trained in climate. They were trained in short-term forecasting. They don't know how to explain, but they're getting calls every day from the viewers. And they're desperate for somebody to help them. And so, anyway, I think there's a way to create education that makes the world more interesting and equips people to live in it in a much more viable way that actually is more human anyhow and doesn't have this triumphalism of solving it all, but living well within it. There will be some solutions, but there will be lots of accommodations. Treating those as losses would be sad. So we can figure out, kids can get hard things. Here are the limits, but there's so much good. Let's live well within them. And then we have the part that Fernando gets to, which is he talked about ways we can make it better. So I like the writing of Wendell Berry very much. He says there are two ways of thinking about the world. One is extractive and the other is nurturing. You can treat farming this way. You can treat mining this way. We're just going to have to take care of the climate. So that's a new job, taking care of the climate. Sounds kind of cool. But we treated it before as if it was something we wanted to just have for free. And so taking care of the climate can be exciting for young people and old people. I'm pretty excited about it. And so that's another thing we can teach people. It's a way of saying, okay, we can also affect the limits. We just need to think about the limits.
So as we're getting towards the end of our time, we have an audience here. I know we have an audience online and others who are going to see this recording. We have people in all forms, all ways of education. We do have teachers and principals. We have technology folks, policy people, future superintendents, entrepreneurs, people who are in the field. What's your advice to them? Or what's your invitation to them as, again, we think across sector, again, with you both having lots of experience and often talking to people who aren't educators, but obviously education has an important role in this. What's your advice or what's your invitation?
I say a couple of different things. I actually want to chime into your previous question, and then I'm going to then I will actually answer your question. I think that, the comments, those are terrific comments. It's very inspiring, if rather sobering. Let me think a little bit about the students that we teach here at Harvard and the students that I teach in my class. I teach, among the things I do is I teach a freshman seminar, first-year seminar on U.S. climate and energy policy, and not surprisingly, there's a fair number of students who want to take that. It's pretty interesting, and one of the big themes, the overarching theme of that course is what is it actually? How does one make change? So what is the theory of change? How do you make change? Is it through the legal system? Is it through technology? Is it through changing our orientations about how we think about society and growth? Is it through legislative processes? Is it through activism and so forth? And I think that the message that I try to convey, and now I'm going to sound very Harvard-centric, that message that I try to convey to my students in the end, and for them to get to the point is this is not a topic for despair. This is a topic where we have to be realistic about what's happening, but we also have to realize that every individual has the opportunity to make a big difference, and that is especially true for Harvard undergraduates. Harvard undergraduates they will be the leaders of tomorrow, and they have an opportunity.
Harvard graduates, just to throw that in there too.
And Harvard graduates. Well, I'm teaching first years, so I'm talking first years. But they will go on to do great things, and that is to say they have the opportunity to give to the world. I like to end with the phrase, the phrase that I'm sure many are familiar with. To whom much has been given, much is expected. And I think that is a very apt phrase for our students, and indeed, it's an expectation that they can live up to. So going back to your question, I actually think that one thing that really can make a difference is learning by seeing. So if superintendents or school districts say, gosh, I'm actually kind of worried about these really heavy rainstorms. We've already had some flooding. It's been a pain in the neck. We've had to close down the school for an unexpected week. It's going to happen some more. Let's actually make a deal of fixing this, and let's make that an educational moment. Or is this an opportunity for us to explain why? Yeah, why? Let's go on to electric school buses, and here's the advantages, and here's why we're going to go to electric school buses. They'll make the ride less. It'll be safer. It'll be less polluting for the kids. It'll be better for the places that the kids get picked up in, and it will also be overall good for the transition. And actually now, I think with some of the federal subsidies, it's actually one that's an affordable change for the school districts. It's kind of a chore logistically, but it's something. It's another teaching moment. So greening your campuses is an opportunity to get all of the community engaged in understanding how we can actually individually make a difference, recognizing that there are these challenges, yet we have an opportunity to contribute.
Thank you, Jim.
So I would say one thing is you just try something. And there are two motivations for this. The first is we do not know what is going to work. So I actually spent a lot of time talking to climate communicators, and they all had this view that you do not want to share bad news with people. Like, people will shut down if you share bad news. The scholarship on that turns out to be terrible. Like, it's just not actually true. What happens is if you just kind of feel awkward about something and never bring it up, then people will not do anything. And it turns out we don't know what will change people's behavior. The reason this is an empirical problem, right? We've run this experiment over and over and over again, and we got no positive results. But it doesn't mean that the thing that was tried 20 years ago doesn't work. It means it didn't work. But I just tell people, try things, because we don't know what will work. There will be a lot of change, and you can make something change. So the two things I say as a practical, one is walk around wherever you are and start noticing the assumptions. What are the assumptions in your life? And figure out how many of them might be vulnerable. It's a framework for starting to understand how the climate works and how you connect with it. The architecture, the diet, how you vacate, how you recreate, what you do, all is based on a set of assumptions. Start to see those assumptions, and the world gets super interesting, and climate change becomes less foreign. And then the last part is already been said by other people more eloquently, but bring it into whatever space you're in. Whatever group you're in, so you're a group of moms, you're a group of teachers, you're a group of people in the facilities department. Just ask, is there anything we should be doing? The answer may be no. But asking that question is very provocative and very helpful. And it turns out that there actually is something to do for most people. And then you feel like you're part of it.
Please join me in thanking Spencer and Jim for being on this last panel.